Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I want to talk about Bomber Pilot by Philip Ardery, a memoir of his time as a B-24 pilot in World War II and a wing commander and a wing operations officer. And so Philip Ardery, by the time World War II had broken out in Europe, he was already in his late 20s. He had been in the Army, and he was a practicing attorney in Frankfurt, which is that way. And he was from Paris, which is that way. He was from the road in between Paris and Lexington. And I don't know how it was in his day, but if you have a house on the road from Paris to Lexington now, you're probably doing pretty well. And he had always wanted to be a pilot. So with everything going on in Europe, he decided to put his law practice on hold for a little while and to join the Army Air Corps. And he learned how to fly planes. This goes over his time training and some of the close calls he had, some of the teachers that he had, some of the other people he was in this class with. He was generally the oldest, and he was not always treated particularly well, particularly by the upperclassmen. They made fun of him, and they called him Kentucky, which he didn't mind. But he really, really hated the way that they treated him. But it worked out for the best. He became a pilot, and unfortunately, he was a pretty good pilot. So they put him to training other pilots, which is not what he wanted to do. He didn't want to train other pilots. And so he had gone down to Texas. He had been stationed in Texas for a while, and he met a woman there, and she was the most beautiful, wonderful woman in the world. That's often part of these memoirs. And they were married on December 6th, 1941, and they hopped in their car, and they were driving to his parents' home on the road from Paris to Lexington. And the next day, they were talking to someone, and the guy said, "Hey, haven't you heard, the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor?" And so he got on the phone and called up his commander, and they said, "Well, it's okay, but, we need you to come back as soon as your honeymoon is over," basically. So he did. And then he began his combat tour not too long after that, after the invasion of North Africa. And he was flying bomber missions, B-24 missions. This is an actual photo, by the way, from one of the raids that he was on. And this is a foil cover. It's very fragile. I'm surprised I haven't scratched it. I have kind of tore it a little bit. He flew a full combat tour from North Africa and then later out of England into Germany. And he saw terrible things. He saw his friends killed in the air near him. He saw planes full of men careen out of the air or just disintegrate or smash into the ground. And he saw, I don't want to say poorly trained, but perhaps their training had been rushed later in the war. He saw accidents occur between American pilots. He saw accidents occur off the runways. And so this book was written in the 70s, and it has that detached quality that you might expect from a book being written 30 years after the fact. But it was really good, and it was really interesting. And apparently at the time, this was the only memoir by a heavy bomber pilot that had ever been written, or published at least, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because there were so many pilots of these heavy bombers. I'm pretty sure that there have been a couple more in the time since the 70s. So I want to read a passage to you from a bombing mission, a very, very dangerous bombing mission that Philip Ardery went on and was commander of the wing, one of the wings that went in. And what it was is that the Nazis had captured an oil field in Romania and were using this refinery to, make gasoline and diesel for their engines. And so it was a very high priority target and was extremely well defended. So the Bomber Command decided that they were going to fly a special mission in at very low levels, something like 400 feet and even lower, to bomb this oil field and put most of it out of production. So this is a passage from that, and you can get an idea of what Philip Ardery went through and what it was like. We found ourselves at that moment running a gauntlet of tracers and cannon fire of all types that made me despair of ever covering those last few hundred yards to the point where we could let the bombs go. The anti-aircraft defenses were literally throwing up a curtain of steel. From the target grew the column of flames, smoke, and explosions, and we were headed straight into it. Suddenly, Sergeant Wells, our small, childlike radio operator who was in the waist compartment for the moment with a camera, called out, "Lieutenant Hughes' ship is leaking gas. He's been hit hard in his left wing fuel section." I had noticed it just about that moment. I was tired of looking out the front at those German guns firing at us. I looked out to the right for a moment and saw a sheet of raw gasoline trailing Pete's left wing. He stuck right in formation with us. He must have known he was hit. He stuck right in formation with us. He must have known he was hard hit because the gas was coming out in such volume that it blinded the waist gunners in his ship from our view. Poor Pete. Fine, religious, conscientious boy with a young wife waiting for him back in Texas. He was holding his ship in formation to drop his bombs on the target, knowing if he didn't pull up he would have to fly through a solid room of fire with a tremendous stream of gasoline gushing from his ship. I flicked the switch intermittently to fire the remote-controlled, fixed 50 caliber machine gun specially installed for my use. I watched my tracers dig the ground. Poor Pete. How I wished he'd pull up a few hundred feet and drop from a higher altitude. As we were going into the furnace, I said a quick prayer. During those moments, I didn't think that I could possibly come out alive, and I knew Pete couldn't. Bombs were away. Everything was black for a few seconds. We must have cleared the chimneys by inches. We must have, for we kept flying. And as we passed over the boiler house, another explosion kicked our tail high and our nose down. Phobal pulled back on the wheel, and the lid leveled out, almost clipping the tops off houses. We were through the impenetrable wall, but what of Pete? I looked out right. Still he was there in close formation, but he was on fire all around his left wing where it joined the fuselage. I could feel tears come into my eyes and my throat clog up. Then I saw Pete pull up and out of formation. His bombs were laid squarely on the target along with ours. With his mission accomplished, he was making a valiant attempt to kill his excess speed and set the ship down in a little river valley south of the town before the whole business blew up. He was going about 210 miles per hour and had to slow up to about 110 to get the ship down. He was gliding without power, as it seemed, slowing up and pulling off to the right in the direction of a moderately flat valley. Pete was fighting now to save himself and his men. He was too low for any of them to jump, and there was not time for the airplane to climb to a sufficient altitude to permit a chute to open. The lives of the crew were in their pilot's hands, and he gave it everything he had. Wells, in our waist gun compartment, was taking pictures of the gruesome spectacle. Slowly the ship on our right lost speed and began to settle in a glide that looked like it might come to a reasonably good crash landing. But flames were spreading furiously all over the left side of the ship. I could see it plainly, as it was on my side. Now it would touch down, but just before it did, the left wing came off. The flames had been too much and had literally burnt the wing off. The heavy ship cartwheeled, and a great flower of flame and smoke appeared just ahead of the point where last we had seen a bomber. Pete had given his lives and the lives of his crew to carry out his assigned task. To the very end, he gave the battle every ounce he had. So afterwards, Philip Ardery would recommend Pete Hughes for the Congressional Medal of Honor, and it was turned down at first, but it was later approved, and Pete Hughes was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for that. And you know, Philip Ardery talks about this in the beginning, about how he had gone out to train. He was a lieutenant in the Army Reserve before the war, before he had joined the Air Corps. And he was out in the middle of the mud and the rain, and he thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I was in the Air Corps? I could be at the base every day, and I could go to the bar every evening, and it would just be warm and cozy and nice. And he, he thought that he could get away from the hellish nature of combat in the Air Corps, and he found that it was its own brand of hell. And so after that, I'm going to read this because it kind of gives some insight into Philip Ardery, a little bit of what he did after the war. But this is from the back here. Philip Ardery was awarded the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross twice, the Air Medal 4 times, and the French Croix de Guerre with Palm for his services in World War II. In 1945, he returned to the practice of law in Kentucky and is now a partner in the firm of Brown, Todd, and Hayburn, Louisville. He has been president of the Kentucky Heart Association and chairman of the board of the American Heart Association. So, if you are interested in reading World War II memoirs and memoirs of air combat, this is a really good example, and I would recommend this book. It was an interesting insight into what a heavy bomber pilot goes through, and also somewhat as far as what a wing operations officer went through and some of the generals he met and worked for and that sort of thing. So this was a good read. I was glad to have read it. And if you're, like I said, if you're into World War II memoirs, this is a good one. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.